في يومها الأول قدمت قمة بيروت إنستيتيوت في مبادرة تعاونية مشتركة وفي عصف ذهني للتفكير في مستقبل المنطقة العربية في العقد القادم. نبدأ أولى جلساتنا اليوم، وأدعو الجميع إلى التقيد من فضلكم في البرنامج والمشاركة مساء في التاون هول، وهو الجلسة الختامية لهذا العصف الفكري. نبدأ إذن حلقة النقاش الأولى لهذا اليوم: الابتكار الذي نتوقعه وكيفية تسخير البيانات بطريقة مسؤولة. أدعو السادة الرئيس التنفيذي لمجموعة وامدا جروب السيد فادي غندور، السيد سامر أبو-الطيف رئيس مايكروسوفت الشرق الأوسط وأفريقيا، السيدة كاساندرا كيلي مستشارة دولية ومتحدثة أيضاً، السيد سوميت جامور رئيس مجلس الإدارة والرئيس التنفيذي لشركة جلوبال جين كورب، السيدة ملاك أكيلي الرئيس التنفيذي لشركة جولدن وايت لتجارة الحبوب، والسيد أندري لوسيكروغ بيتيري رئيس المبادرة الأوروبية التغييرية المشتركة ومؤسس ACapital.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Fadi Ghandour. I am in the business of venture capital and investing in technology across the MENA region and emerging markets. Please have a seat. We have an hour to discuss a very relevant, very powerful subject about data, about disruption, about the digital revolution that is happening globally, how it's affecting our region, what are the initiatives that are being taken to actually address some of these challenges, what are the security issues, what are the issues related to peace, and everything that you read about every single day in today's world. Let me start very quickly. Before I introduce the panel, and I will have a very brief introduction, let me say a couple of anecdotal stories so that we can get ourselves into this subject. Back in 1990, a few scientists came out with the idea that they wanted to sequence the human genome. So they came up with the project that's called the Human Genome Sequencing Project. They said it's going to take them about 15 years to actually complete the job, and it is going to cost them a few $1 billion to do that. The American government stepped in to finance it, right? 7 years later, only 1% of the human genome was sequenced. So everybody was saying, is this a failure? I mean, how are you going to do it in 15 years when in the first 7 years you only sequenced 1%? But because we live in a digital and the digitized world and everything is exponential, a scientist which works with Google today, called Ray Kurzweil, he said, no. You have not failed. You at 1%, you are at halfway through. Because in the way digital disruption happens and accelerated returns, 1% you're halfway through, because 7 doubles of 1%, you're at 100%. And that's what happened. After 3-4 years, after a few $1 billion, the human genome was sequenced. So when you don't even notice it, when you think at 1% nothing is happening, you're really there. So this is a message for us in the region where we think that disruption is not happening. It is actually at 1% today. So watch out, right? But the punchline for this story is it cost a few $1 billion maybe to sequence it in 2003. Today, it costs less than $1,000 to sequence a genome. And think about that. Think about the power of that. Another anecdote that I'd like to share. By the year 2025, we are told that there is going to be 75 billion connected devices. Think about that. Consuming data, producing data, connecting everything that you see. Cars, kitchens, your workplace, your telephone, 75 billion. It's massive. And then right today, even here in the UAE, 5G has arrived. 5G has arrived. 5G is not 25% faster than 4G. 5G is 100% faster than 4G. You can't imagine it But once you play with it, once you touch it, you will know. And how will this affect everything that is mobile for us is going to be staggering. And recently, my last point, and recently, Google slipped a leak of a paper that they have produced that they had achieved quantum supremacy. This is a small piece of news that came out last week. NASA published it on their website, and then they removed it. I don't know why, I'm not a scientist. But the claim is staggering. You know, quantum computing is the future of computing, probably. And they solved a mathematical problem in 3 minutes that would have taken the fastest supercomputer that exists today, listen to this, 10,000 years. They solved it in 3 minutes. Now, what that means is way beyond me, but this is an introduction to our panel today. So, Samir Abu-Ltaif, President of Microsoft in the MENA region. Tell us what's happening. How is this going to affect us? What are the implications to citizens, to work, and to the environment that we live in?
Thank you, Fadi, for the introduction and for, again, re-amplifying my yesterday's statement about quantum computing and the amazing disruptive impact that it is very likely to have on the technology itself and, of course, on all the industries and all of us as we are becoming more entrenched and involved in handling technology. But to me, I think what is going to happen is that the way we saw this proliferation of devices and mobility, and we never thought any one of us would have more than one device. And today this is the reality because cloud computing has enabled it and applications have become part of our life. I think we are going to see artificial intelligence and machine learning not acquired by us to go and say, I want to buy an AI agent, or I want to really have AI technology in my enterprise, or the government is adopting AI. There is no such thing. The news that I have for you is that the way you are using everything today, it will be infused with artificial intelligence in every application, in every domain, in every tool. And the purpose of that is to complement what you do on these tools and applications to enable you to let go of all the mundane stuff that is not productive, not creative, not innovative, not cognitive, and focus as a human being on the insights that you could bring, on the ingenuity that you could bring, and you can imagine the elevation of us as a human being if we have that complementary aspect through the infusion of AI. That said, I want to emphasize again is skilling and upskilling is going to be the most critical mandate that governments, educators, enterprises would have. And we cannot wait until the curriculum from K to 12 or even in universities is revamped. There is a mandate today to start thinking about lifelong learning. Companies like us, every quarter, I have 8 hours of training. It's like pilots. I wouldn't be certified to continue working if I don't get trained. And I would imagine that everyone, including those who are like shifting and sharing and influencing policies and ideas and thought leadership, they need to get trained because they are responsible. They need to know what's happening.
But then that's a very powerful issue for us here. So skilling and upskilling and changing curriculum. Do you feel that our public sector institutions understand this challenge? Are we up to it? Or are we going to have, because data is so ubiquitous, are we going to have parallel channels of acquiring learning and knowledge and bypassing the traditional systems?
The good news is that we have very good stories from a number of countries in the region that are leading. But also at the same time, we have attempts at addressing this digital and, if you like, revamped, revolutionized aspects of education, where we're thinking that we throw devices in the hands of students and we reshape the classroom to be more digital, and then we have achieved what we want. The reality is that it is more than that. There is a cultural shift that needs to happen. There is a serious piece of work that needs to happen at the level of preparing and readying our teachers. Our teachers are living with the fear of a loss of power because they were the go-to when it comes to knowledge. Today they are invited to be engaged in the learning experience in a different way. They need to become more, interacting with the students and learning with them through the leverage of sources of information that's coming from the internet. I would say that we should continue to help the educators, the ministries of education. We are doing that, others are doing that. I think the agenda is very clear, that it's strategic. But I would say that some of the universities that are leading in the region and some of the organizations that are looking at this as a critical element in elevating the capabilities of the people need to be the ones that will show the way. And I am positive, I'm optimistic that we have started to see some of that work taking place.
Thank you. Cassandra, from your angle, the proliferation of data, artificial intelligence, instant connectivity through 5G, take us through the challenges there, the security issues, the facial recognition, the privacy issues. I mean, what does that mean to us also? I mean, from that angle.
A lot of us in this room gave up our privacy a long time ago, and so that's something we all need to be aware of, and to some extent we can take some of that back. But let's start with taking responsibility for what it is in order to get the convenience, what we're prepared to give up, and that's a lot of information and data about ourselves. When I'm thinking about, so for those of you, I've spoken to a few of you, I am on the Global Tech Panel, and that's the hat I'm really thinking about when I'm sitting here today. And that we brought that together because there needs to be a new form of collaboration. You need civil, you need investment, finance, political, corporate, to come together to really talk about some of the issues you've just brought up in terms of the facial recognition, artificial intelligence, and basically technology for good. So as much as one of what we care about is looking at technology for good, for developing economies, and also for peace and security, it is that you can't look at one side of the equation. At the end of the day, it is both exciting and terrifying, and the very devices that we use for our convenience can be used turned against us for extortion, and worse. And so I think it's being mindful of those. When I was thinking about, there's lots of things I could talk to you, but I won't get that in 1 minute in terms of facial recognition and how the data sets behind that are very flawed, and that's leading to false positives and false arrests. And if you imagine putting those inside an autonomous weapon, it may misidentify a target. So I could go into the detail, but I want to step back and remind again us of one thing. The biggest thing that I'm afraid of are the humans. Technology is just a thing that we create and we're inventing and we're using, but it's us that's sitting behind it and making the decisions of what we invent, what programming we give it, what ethics we're teaching it. I actually don't know, for those of you who know a seminal piece of work, it was Asimov's book, I, Robot, I think back in the 40s, and so I didn't have to remember them. I wrote down the 3 tenets. That a robot not injure or through inaction allow harm to humans, that a robot must obey a human provided that the human, doesn't conflict with the first point, and that the robot protect its own existence provided that it doesn't conflict with the first 2 points. Well, we're already not following those rules of ethics. We're already figuring out with driverless cars who to kill. I was speaking to a colleague the other day who said, one of the byproducts of driverless cars is that there are insufficient organs for organ donors because there are fewer accidents on the road, and the major place where we were finding organs was from car accident victims. So do we tell the robot this? In fact, look, we're a little bit low on a few of these organs at the moment, so it makes a decision, well, look, she looks like it's time up for her, so actually I'll decide to kill her because we need her organs. So there's a whole range of very complicated ethical issues. And if I can leave you with one message today, it would be, just like when people got all in a tiz about this thing called the cloud and what is the cloud, and still some people say, what is the cloud? What is technology? It is something that we are creating, and the wonderful side of it is that we can propel communities forward, and the negative side is we can do precisely the reverse. And in the world of peace and security, which is obviously topical at the moment, I spend a lot of time on the lethal autonomous weapons side because that development is going full steam ahead with very few people understanding the terrifying implications.
Does this empower non-state actors as we go forward? I mean,
Does it,
who
sorry,
will,
empower-
non-state actors, I
Yeah.
mean, because it's out there. You are able to have, you don't need states anymore to actually sponsor such challenges to security. Is there a way that we can respond to these? I mean, I know the state is ubiquitous everywhere, but what worries me also is the non-state actors that become out there and actually are watching us all the time. I mean, is there a response to this? Are we at a point where there's no return here and we're exposed continuously because of technology that we created?
Again, it's a double-edged sword. So the very technology that we've created, and someone was talking to me the other day about how Google, it can't control its own algorithm. You know, it's sort of almost beyond its own control. It's out there making its own decisions, and short of pulling the plug out, they don't really know what to do because it's machine learning as such that it is more powerful than ever intended. The wonderful thing is, yes, we've created some things that are to our detriment, but we can use those same tools and turn them to help eradicate the bad actors. I'm perplexed as to why we're not doing this quickly. And actually, I sat on a panel a few months ago here with a gentleman from Cinerise, and he was saying we're able to do it. There just doesn't seem enough enthusiasm, or there doesn't seem enough incentive, ironically, in it for the moment, that you use AI to actually scrub and find the bad behaviour and remove it from our diet. And so I do find that somewhat perplexing, and that's something that we'll be focusing on the panel, is how to precisely use it to protect ourselves again, rather than to lay ourselves open to harm.
Thank you. Andre Pietri, you're working on the JEDI project in Europe. We're always told, or we are feeling that the challenge...
Without laser sabers, I want to insist.
Excuse me?
Without laser sabers, but please.
Right. Anyway, wait for my question. The battle for digital supremacy is happening between China and the United States today. That's what we're told. And so Europe is nowhere to be discussed significantly at this stage, and I'm asking this provocatively. And so the JEDI, which is the response of Europe to DARPA, which is the American Defense Department research, which has funded a lot of the technological breakthroughs that we see today. Tell us a bit more about JEDI, how Europe is responding. Why is it important that Europe responds to that global challenge between the two superpowers today?
Thank you. So first,
can you get the microphone closer? So
yeah, let me answer on the why first. I mean, you mentioned. Do people know, for example, that at Facebook's AI division in Menlo Park, out of 150 people of FAIR, Facebook AI research, 30 of them are French, and 17 are Germans, and probably many other Europeans. So when you hear somebody like Li Kai-fu, who is a well-known investor of China, talking about AI being a two-sided coin with the US and China, he's just plainly doing nationalism. Unfortunately, people begin to integrate that part, and indeed, Europe being fragmented, as is the region in which we are, we think that it's the case. Let me tell you the why. Who knows what a hexabyte, a zettabyte is in this room? It's 10 factor 21. Why is what is happening so important, and why this time is different? And we have a lot of policymakers in the room. You will say the crisis in Europe that we're seeing, the crisis in the region is all again. Because the data that was created since mankind exists until 2012 was 2 zettabytes. We are currently at 20 zettabytes. And in 18 months, we will have doubled that again. So if you put that on a chart, this is the exponential part that you said. And why is this so important? Because technology is becoming totally political. Think about cybersecurity. It's today affecting most of the electoral processes. We had that in the US a bit. We had that in France. We're going to see with deep fakes, these fake videos, destabilization at a level never seen before. If you think about face recognition, I want to go beyond the pure, okay, it's terrible because of state. It's basically, if you think about the social contract, and for both a French and a German as I am, for French especially, the social contract was the thing in which we believed. There was a state and there was the individuum. face recognition allows authoritarian states, and you can imagine who I'm mentioning, actually that the individual begins to be some kind of an extension of the state. There is no more connection. And think about social media. The way today political debate, and for a democratic person like I am, the debate is the essence of the democracy. Contradictory views, consensus building, and then the majority gets its way for a certain amount of time. And all this is completely changed with technology. So, third point, and I'll finish on that, when you look at how the US currently is responding to this technological challenge, they are focusing mainly their effort in what they call autonomous systems. Because beyond AI, beyond the autonomous driving, what is it? Is because of the data I explained to you, we all, probably since 5, 10, for the smartest of us, which I don't belong to, probably since 1 or 2 years, we have lost understanding of what's going on in the world. It's just going beyond our cognitive capabilities. And that's why AI is so important, because when you think about the way political decisions are made, they are made today, it's increasingly made on very uninformed decision. When you look at how companies, and that's why companies, and I heard the gentleman from Microsoft saying that, embrace AI because it's a way to, the Holy Grail, it's a capacity to anticipate a bit the future. So what can be the response in the US, they call that the third offset strategy, and that's why we should also see AI as a capability to basically enhance mankind, because today it is wrong, and for the British people in the room, you all know how little information there was on Brexit, and we all know how worse and worse our political decisions will be taken, especially when we have a US president that every morning is kind of changing the name of the game. So the way forward, and my worry about Europe, but also my hope, is what we're trying to do is we probably need to change the way we work and we even regulate. We need to be agile because this world has become extremely unpredictable. We need to have foresight because you talked about education, but what does it mean? And that's why I'm so worried about authoritarian state becoming so prevalent, is because those who are able today to think 3, 5, 10 years in advance are those who are going to win, because they're able to make the investment in physical, but also in soft infrastructure, which is education. And last but not least, we need to be able to experiment all the time. And think about a country right now who is doing all these things: agility, long-term thinking, and experimentation. China is obviously topping my mind, and I think if the Europeans don't realize that and not do an evolution and a revolution, then I'm indeed extremely worried.
Thank you, Andre. I want to come back to you after I finish with my rest two panelists on the issue of the social contract and how do we actually respond to it. And then maybe how does Europe actually work together as Europe? And then what happens to the rest of the world? So if it's Europe, China, and the US, where does this leave us here, living here in the rest of the world? Sumit, Jamuar, you are at the heart of the Human Genome Project. You came out in response to what I had talked about earlier, that the Human Genome Project is mostly a Western genome project, and you have launched the Global Genome Project, which is a response to that. Tell us a little bit about it and why it matters that the data that we have is not only about Western genes, but there's a global 5-6 billion people that are not Westerners, right? And what does this do to medicine today?
Thank you, Fadi. First of all, I mean, for a lot of people, the DNA tends to be a very esoteric concept. And so the way to think about the DNA is like it's the operating instruction manual for each one of us. And I think a simplification which people have used lots of times, and I will use that, is it's like the book of life. And that book of life has, if you remember the structure of the DNA, which won the Nobel Prize for the discoverer, it's like a twisted, coiled rope. And it's got 3 billion base pairs. And the way to think about it is that this book of life has 3 billion words. It's spread across 20,000 genes, so think of them as 20,000 chapters, which are arranged in 23 subsections, which is the 23 pairs of chromosomes that we inherit, one set from our mother and one set from our father. Now, what we are trying to do is we're trying to say, if this is my code, what does the external manifestation of that code look like? So if I have a particular string of code at a certain place, does that mean I have a blue eye or brown eye or gray eye? If I have something else, does it mean I have black hair or brown hair or blonde hair? But it also leads to something beyond that, which is very important for us as we think about our health. So now DNA, the way, why I'm so excited by it, and I discovered it in detail about 7 years ago, is that imagine something which can tell you your personal story. Where do you come from? What's my ethnicity? What's my personal history? How do I connect to the earliest humans that were there on Earth? What should I eat? Is this appropriate for me? What should I drink? What is the risk of disease that I have? And more importantly, can I ward that disease off before it happens? And then if I have a disease or if I have an illness, how do I solve that? What's the best medication to help me get there? So there are all these possibilities that the DNA holds and the secrets of the DNA hold. Now, given it's a morning session, I wanted to do a show of hands. How many of you would want to be in control of your health so that you can enjoy doing, let's say have another 20 years beyond what you were normally expected to have of healthy life, doing exactly the stuff that you wanted to do for as long as you wanted to do? How many of you would want that? Well, very interesting that I think it's still the morning effect. So let me ask for a show of hands again, because it seems to be only 50% want a healthier life. How many people would want that? Again, show of hands. Well, I think the wake-up call does help, right? So now imagine that if I told you that only, in this room, only about 40% of you will get that promise. Only 40%. How many of you would want to be involved in changing that? Again, a show of hands. Right? And that's wonderful, because that's exactly what we are solving, because we have the technology, and as Fadi said, imagine in 15 years, from $2.7 billion in 13 years to sequence the first human genome. It now costs a few $100s, and we can do it in a few hours. So we can generate the code and the data. It's, as Samer said, we have the AI, machine learning, cloud compute technologies, which allow us to look through this enormous amount of data and find the patterns. And it is fundamentally disrupting industries, whether it's healthcare, whether it's consumer, whether it's insurance, whether it's sovereign health programs where people are spending a lot of money, the governments are spending a lot of money, and saying, how can I make it more precise? But what we are missing is understanding of individuals. So for my financial friends, it's a bit like having a fixed income index and having an equity fund, and then comparing an equity fund to a fixed income index and saying, oh, I performed really well or performed very badly, and I have a huge volatility in my fund portfolio. So that's what we're doing. So we're looking to map and organize the world's genomic diversity, because there are about 10,000 ethnicities in the world. 80% of all data comes from people of European ancestry. When we explore the richness of the world and richness of humanity, what we end up doing is we end up solving for disease. And that is really exciting, because when you think about the causes of morbidity and mortality, more and more, we've sorted the infectious disease side out, and I think we are on track to hopefully win that battle. What is going to impact all of us is the non-communicable diseases, which come back to the genetic link and our DNA. So that's what we're doing, and that's why it's so important. I mean, you've seen the response from the audience.
And I will come back to you on precision medicine and what that means,
and
how it affects medicine in the future and the pharmaceutical industry.
I look forward to that.
Malak Akiely, you are a Jordanian. Welcome to Abu Dhabi. You work in commodity trading, in oil and gas and other commodities. How does that affect you in your work? You live in a city in the region, you trade globally. What does AI mean to you? What does big data mean to you? How does it change the way you actually conduct your work today versus what could have happened in previous days?
Good morning. So it's striking to know, Fadi, that the data generated in 2 days is as much as the data collected in the human history before 2003. So there is no doubt that the big data is the next frontier for productivity growth, for innovation, and first competition. Now, when you look at this region, you will see what's the value proposition? How can I embrace the technology? I mean, honestly, I'm doing oil and commodities, strategic commodities for the last 11 years, and we work closely with those companies who want, they are already using technology. So the challenge is that, for example, one of the top trends of sustainability in 2019 was agriculture. So there is a scrutiny for nutrition, safety, and health. So that's why you see a lot of companies, for example, now we are developing, one of the companies I work with, it's a Swiss company. We are developing a blockchain platform for fintech, for agriculture commodities, just to remove the inefficiency, start using smart contracts. It's kind of introducing new dimensions of hedging and brokerage and trading. And also there's another example of one of the companies they are using Microsoft blockchain is SGS. It's one of the largest groups doing commodity trading, and they just want to improve their data security. Looking at these examples, and other more, of course, related with pure agriculture in terms of improving the crop yields and all sorts of stuff, it's scary. It's my personal nightmare when I go back to my clients, some of my clients in this region, whether the government or the private sector, because we are still doing the traditional, we are far, far behind. And it should be translated, it should be, my challenge is how to make it relevant, in our business model, in our structure. So this is one of the challenges.
Where does the citizen, the individual, sit in this formula? When you have AI, and you're able to analyze data so much more precisely than a human being and understand it so much better, where does this make us redundant? And does this mean you need less people working for you? Does it matter? Does this make your business altogether irrelevant because we can do it so ubiquitously alone, independently as people that trade?
It depends on which side are you. So if you are from the supplier side, we need this technology, and already it's there. But from the buyer side, they have to adapt, because at the end we need these grains to come to, we need the wheat. It's a food security issues, and the same for energy as well.
Right. So I mean, I'm looking at X-ray specialists today. We're told that this whole field is going to die because of big data and the precision of analyzing X-ray or whatever, because machines are so much smarter. Are we building this? And this is a question for everyone, really. Are we building the technology that gets us to become redundant in the future, Samer?
No.
Are we? Is that? Are we saying we don't need people?
I think we need to approach this with a view on history, despite the fact that the way we're projecting the future to be so disruptive and dramatically much accelerated. It's important to think that even the shift from the first industrial revolution was a shift of 50% of the labor force moved from agriculture to industry. So this is no different, and I'm trying to simplify it. And I'll give you other examples from the 70s, when automation started to evolve. There was that view that computers will replace human beings. And today, now that it is history and we can all reflect on it and we have a track record, have computers reduced the number of accountants in a company that were handling books? Yes.
Absolutely. I can attest to that.
Yeah. Have computers changed certain jobs like tellers in banks by introducing automated teller machines? I don't think the banking, if you like, payroll has been shrunk as a result of reducing tellers and investing in ATMs, but those tellers with the right skilling became sellers, became customer sales representatives that were elevated in their performance. They were giving you and me as banking customers a much better service. Right. I think this is the way we need to approach it. Right. To Malak's example about, she does work with suppliers across the globe. Many of them, maybe they don't speak English. Today, there is an ability for us to have on time, on the go, translation and working on documents together, where you don't really require that level of work to translate and really to manage these documentation.
Instantaneous.
These are positive things.
Yeah, these are positive things, but they're changing. There's a whole different set of things that are affecting us that maybe we're not feeling immediately today. Andre, you want to add to this?
Yeah, just on the translation part, I fully agree. I mean, we're all amazed by, I'm sure they're great Microsoft tools, but also by Google Translate. But I would be very worried for bank teller. I think what we are seeing in the bank industry, look at how much people HSBC just shed, is the next mining industry. Huh? And for the Europeans, I don't know if you know how many combinations there are at the European Parliament of translations. You know, you do C28, I mean, for those who do math, it's several hundreds. These guys, I would be very worried about that. But I think the point I want to make here, and it's maybe also interesting for the region, because that's what we are all here, and thank you, Ragida, for inviting me, is we have to be careful of drawing the line. I don't know that the future of AI, and who I am to say that, is big data. My 15-month-old kid, it does not need 1 million cats and labeled cat images to recognize an animal. And once he has seen 3 or 4 times a cat, he knows what a dog and I think the future, especially for those who are not Chinese or not American, is to think about the next big thing. And you asked me about what was JEDI about, is to launch grand challenges and to stop this myth that we have in Europe of creating a Google or Facebook or a Tesla, but to think that the future of AI is small data. And by the way, if you have small data, that means, for example, surveillance systems without a centralized database. If you want to see the opposite, go to China. That is maybe also very compatible with our privacy rules. The future of energy is maybe not lithium ion. And when I see my European politicians putting 2 billion right now in building a mega factory, which is a fifth or a third of the size of the one of Elon Musk's, and it will be ready in 5 years, it's going to be 2 billion wasted money. The next step is maybe solid state, and it's maybe hydrogen. I mean, we need to think, and this is why I'm very positive, and I think that's how the region should think about it. Let's think about, we are living a time where cards are reshuffled all the time. And we need to think about the next big thing. The Chinese are doing that. They did not succeed in diesel engines or in thermal engines, and so they're thinking about electric. I mean, this leapfrogging is something that the democratic or countries or the countries who don't want to be under a duopoly need to think of. Space is the next frontier, and we're just at the beginning of it. So there is a very positive story in technology, which is not necessarily about technology per se, but how do the technologies you develop embed the values you are extremely, I mean, think about the sustainable revolution. This is a huge opportunity, especially for this region, to think not about a better use of oil, but maybe what it will be beyond oil.
Cassandra?
I mean, so much of it was already said, and you said it actually in your opening statement, in terms of the fact that, you know, we're removing drudgery and we're making way for caring creativity. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people have understood. I think if we get excited about humanity, if we can unlock humanity, if we obviously need to come back to the ethics issue and some of the governance that we have that's very poor around data privacy and information we're collecting, including information about our health and how it's used for or against us. But at the end of the day, the idea that we can actually take away some of the drudgery, the mundane, even, I'm sorry for lawyers, even actually replace some of the lawyers in the room with sort of, you know, artificial intelligence. This does actually take the best of human capability and say, we're setting you free to help us solve, to help us create the better, to help us create the better tomorrow. Many of us haven't had that opportunity because we have to do all of these mundane tasks that none of us particularly like. So let's take those off our plate. And if it ends up that I get a couple of hours extra just to actually sit on a mountain or do the meditation that I know I should do, that's okay too. I don't have to endlessly create. I could actually have a more pleasant existence. I do want to come back to something that you talked about in terms of health data. And again, it reminds me, I did some testing, and one of my friends recently found out her father wasn't her father. I didn't find anything quite so disruptive. But then your insurance company can use it against you. Because then, there's the risk of, yes, I want to know. I want to be healthier. I want to look at chronic disease. I want to look at prevention. I want to know what I need to be careful of in my personal story. But then you go to insure yourselves in your life insurance company, and if you've done that test, there's still insufficient rules around that. They can use that against you, either to not insure you or say, well, we know through looking at your genetics that you might end up with multiple sclerosis. You did end up with multiple sclerosis, therefore, sorry, uninsurable event. So I think there's all sorts of unintended byproducts and consequences we just simply have not thought through. I'll pause there because I know
and Sumit, I'll get to you, and that's something that we all should think about.
Yeah.
So,
and I love what you
but the issue of exponential change is meant to tell us that thinking about it is not a bureaucratic process that is going to get stuck in bottlenecks in governments or in institutions while these things are running away so far from us. Sumit, and this is at the heart of what Cassandra was talking about. Who owns the data? And how does it affect medicine? Your discussion about precision medicine, it's so interesting. Can you tell us about it? What does that mean?
Sure. Let me first address a really, really important point that Cassandra has mentioned, which is about, can adverse decision be made, for example, by insurance? And I think, look, there's a precedence, for example, in the United States, there's GINA Act, which is Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And this is where policymakers have to step in and say, look, you cannot have adverse selection. You cannot use the risk, because the risk is about helping you manage that better, but you can't use it for individual pricing. And I'm very encouraged and positive about the fact that, when I engage with ethics committee discussions around the world, or, when I look at the dialogue, when I look at what's happening from a regulatory perspective, it is very encouraging to see that protection is coming to play. The bit where what excites me is, I grew up in India, and I remember working at a consulting firm 20 years ago in '99, and we were looking at India's tele-density, which is the number of telephone lines per 100 people. And India's tele-density at that point was 2. Okay? And the 5-year plan was to move it from 2 to 5. And most of it was in looking at fixed lines. In those 5 years, the mobile revolution happened in India. And right now, India has almost 90% coverage. Over 1 billion people have phones, right? India is the second largest consumer of internet on the mobile after China. It's bigger than the US. And when you look at how it's transformed, in the past, even in the early 2000s, we used to get a call, and earlier the vegetable seller would come with his cycle and his little stalk, and he would be going around in this heat. And then it transformed that, my mother would call him up and say, listen, I want this, this, this. And he would actually come and deliver on demand. So he didn't have excess inventory. He didn't have to go around in the heat. And it transformed that person's life, but it also transformed the life of the consumer, because my mother did not have to go out and say, hey, I need this. And he says, I'm sorry, I'm all sold out. Now imagine the impact it has had. Right now, the power of the mobile phone, for example, in Africa, I did some work in financial inclusion in India and Africa. And in financial inclusion, the fact that you have M-Pesa, mobile payments, all these things, all these things have transformed the way we think about life and we think of how we behave. So going to your point about AI, it is a hugely powerful technology. You look at genomics, it's a hugely powerful technology. So, but people adapt to that change. Right. And people adapt to how they use technology to benefit from that. And we retrain ourselves. Yes. How many of us would guess the people who find it easiest to pick up the mobile phone is the kids. Right. Guess the people who find it the toughest are basically the grandparents. Yeah. So going back to that, it's important. Now, I know you wanted to ask about precision medicine. The reason I brought those examples is deliberate. Now imagine using this exceptionally powerful technology, which happened in an adjacent industry, being the repository of our health. Right. being able to interact with our health in a very significant way, because we are now used to using this technology. Having access to our health anywhere we go, whether it's health records, whether it's responses to drugs, whether it's responses, if I have an issue, I can, and that transforms the way things work. So the end vision is, it's not about, if you go back to mobile phones, it started off with Wall Street elites having mobile phones. Right now, it's billions of people across the world who have mobile phones. And that's, I think, that for us is the transformation that I think we can make with genomics. It's about 7.5+ billion people on the planet. How can we give them that access? Because when you move at that scale,
who's gonna come out and sequence every human being today?
So,
and then if we actually do the genome sequencing for all of us, who will own the data?
Yeah.
I mean, is this another superpower story where us that live in markets that are outside of that innovation process, but we're only consumers of it? Are we only on the receiving end? Who owns that data? Will we need, and that's a question for everyone, will we need supranational organizations today that are beyond countries, so that we have a custodian of that knowledge and that data outside of the manipulation of states?
Yeah, Fadi, if I may, and this summit I think is ideal to raise that issue globally, is that if you consider cybersecurity threats that are today ongoing, I think it's not a secret that there is one country in 2012, country or not country, attacked 150 countries around the world. You know, operations in the UK were rescheduled. People's health were, I mean, that's a war.
Absolutely.
So this is one. The ethics around what we discussed here, be it in medical sciences, be it in autonomous vehicles, be it on, aspects associated even with the ability of a human beings to shape and harness artificial intelligence for greater things is amazing. But as you can imagine, like any tool, you can turn it into a weapon. So the point is that there is maybe a call for Abu Dhabi Convention, Geneva Convention, for the whole world to come and talk about the risks associated with these developments. Because the amazing people that are working on this technology, those beautiful gurus that we love, and we hire them, are unbelievably smart. But they are not necessarily the ones that are framing the policies that will govern the right use of these technologies.
Exactly.
So there is a global call, there is a leadership call for
But
a convention.
Is there something happening?
And I represent a high-tech company. This needs to be governed. My colleagues in other companies, they will say, no, this is going to prevent, motivated innovations. I'm sorry, this needs to be governed. There is a call for governance around this.
Which sits on top of
yeah, the United Nations.
because we can't cede this power to
yeah, you cannot imagine the inclusion piece
and
that
Cassandra,
he's raising.
both.
Yeah, so,
And
So to add to that, so the good news is, I mean, there's a model which is already there, which is around GDPR in
Europe.
In Europe, right?
Yes.
And if you go back to it,
The Americans are so resistant to it. Only California came up with a GDPR type of thing, and the rest of America says we're not going to do that.
So the challenge we all face is one of a trust issue, because if you think about Trust 1.0, where you say, "Trust me, I will do it right," has basically been demolished by the behavior of certain institutions or certain companies, right? Now, if you look at GDPR gives this data belongs to the individual, right? And any company, any organization,
But who says so?
Industry.
I'm sorry, I mean, it does. We say it belongs to us, but who actually tells us that we own it? How do we know that we actually own it?
But that's the next paradigm. The second thing, Fadi, is very important to understand, is actually this is why the global companies, particularly in genomics, would not be able to solve for it, because they have a biased data set. It's like voice recognition. 15 years ago, if I said hello, they would probably not even recognize what my voice looks like.
Being an Indian
Being
accent.
Indian accent, right? And now, if you look at California, most of the representation tends to be, it's the reason why certain companies have a Caucasian bias is because of that. Right. So it will go back to a national level in terms of the dialogue and other things that.
And that needs to be addressed. Malak,
Yes,
quickly.
I have to. Yeah. Okay. So first point. I'm trying to compile all the information. So the first point is that I truly believe that the gap you are talking about is actually where opportunities could emerge in this region. So if we are thinking 2020s, it's thinking technology 2020s. So our youth, they have the energy. We need to give them and empower them and give them the skills and talented to try to catch up.
But let me ask you, Malak, something.
Yeah.
Our youth are already engaged.
Yes.
Are our youth telling
yeah.
our states that we really might not need you very much because everything is available online?
Absolutely. This is my second point. The policy, everything about data is related with the policies given the implication of privacy. So everything needs to have a data governance process. We need to get everyone involved, lawmakers, policies, and we need to work on it now. I mean, the government, they have the funds, I mean, in this region. So just imagine if we do it comprehensively, collectively together.
Cassandra, and then Andre. Cassandra,
I'm just going to use this as my last thing I'll actually say, but I was just listening to, that children, they can spot a cat meme, they can use an iPad at the age of less than 15 months. The problem is the children aren't running the show. I work in boardrooms where only a few years ago, directors didn't know how to use an iPad. So the decision makers, the leaders...
A few years ago or even today?
Yeah, and even today, thank you. Yes, thanks to Diligent, it's getting easier. That was a free plug. So the decision makers and our leaders of today are ill-equipped for the decisions of today, let alone the decisions of tomorrow. So bringing in what a lot of you have been saying and what you just said then, Malak, we need to have these new forms of collaborations. Why a technologist is brought in the room after the person's thought of the wondrous idea that they might like to create. Have people in the room earlier, bring collaborations across industries, across borders. For me, that is really the only hope that we stand in order to truly make technology and AI a force for good, because the children are not in the control seat,
awesome.
But yet we're setting their future up for something
it's good to know, but somebody that doesn't know is a child. So which means the curiosity and the learning process. I mean, children is not an age, it's a knowledge. Andre,
I don't know if you remember the famous letter that Einstein wrote to Roosevelt, and that created actually the Manhattan Project. And basically it's the topic to say technology can be used for very ill purposes. It was basically warning Roosevelt about the Nazi preparation of an atomic bomb. So I think we need to work on the ethical part of it, but we need at the same time to be sure that the countries that want to push their values are at the forefront of it. We need to do the two things in parallel, because the day, you are a citizen, not in Beijing, but in Harare, you are already completely face recognized by Chinese face recognition companies. And it's just the beginning. And I personally don't want that to happen. And secondly, there is a myth, and sorry, I'm going to be a little bit realpolitik here or cynical. There was this myth that the world was coming together. No, I don't think this is happening. We see that there are countries who are pushing values who are completely different from each other's. Where I completely agree is that there is a need for a new form of governance, because indeed the privacy topic, and it's going to be very strange for me as a European to say that GDPR is a catastrophe, but it is. 1 year after GDPR, 15 months later, there are increasing reports saying the fact that you need to stop hoarding data is actually an incredible gift giving to those who have done it before, the Microsoft, the Facebooks. And secondly, the cost of doing GDPR is killing the smaller companies who are the incumbents. But the privacy topic is something indeed which is important for everybody. I was amazed, and I'm finishing on this image. When you're at Union Station, I was there last week in DC, you have Google showing on 90-meter billboard, privacy is at the core of our priorities. I don't think...
How ironic.
Well, it's ironic, but I think they have understood it is important as a business. What we need is to turn that as a competitive advantage.
Andre, you had the last statement. Thank you very much. I think we posed many questions. We're not supposed to come out with answers, but we're all scratching our heads after this. Thank you very much. Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Ghandour, all the speakers.